focused on these outcomes. So we're focused on ensuring that we have plans in place for students to build knowledge of the world, to read meaningful texts, to express their ideas through writing, speaking, and thinking. The way that our planning process works in Louisiana is that through Super App, school systems create a plan. They submit that plan along with an aligned budget. And then after that, we work together in terms of the implementation of that plan. So Strong Start is an opportunity to augment the plans that you have in place. We have a strong and coherent academic strategy. And with Strong Start, the goal is to ensure that plans are updated so that they continue to use high quality curriculum in our new environment, that they take into account how we can continue high quality teacher development in this new environment, and then of course, high quality assessments. So the specific aspects that are going to be addressed in this Strong Start plan are outlined here. And so the key updated goals for Strong Start are: 1, ensuring that at the beginning of the upcoming academic year, every student's academic needs are identified. After they're identified, then ensuring that there is a plan in place for every student, which may include extra time and supports for students with the greatest unfinished learning. Also, that there are clear next steps for every high school student and recent graduate. These are some of the academic pieces. We also know that it is incredibly important for there to be some systemic pieces in place to ensure continuous learning. And so in order for this to happen in our new environment, knowing that there could be modified operations, through Strong Start, school systems can also request funding to ensure that some of these provisions are in place, including a one-to-one device and internet access for students, a strategic communication plan, versatile delivery methods for instruction, and then also, and these are the 2 things that we will be discussing today, adaptive staffing plans and flexible calendars and school schedules. So the next few slides go over the planning guide for Strong Start. And so the planning priorities for Strong Start are aligned with the planning priorities that we have every year as part of our school system planning process. I'm going to do a quick overview of the 4 domains for the planning priorities, and we're going to take a deeper look at the domains around workforce talent and also school system operations, because those are the key pieces that dig into the adaptive staffing plan. So the first planning priority is around core academics. As I outlined previously within this planning priority, the key aspects of the Strong Start plan need to address what we have outlined here. The next domain focuses on students with diverse needs. This domain has a strong priority around ensuring student and staff well-being, supporting the needs of English language learners, supporting the needs of students with disabilities. There is a session at 3 o'clock actually focused on unfinished learning, and so that is being broadcast on YouTube. And so if you all would like to dig into that a little bit more, there's an opportunity to do that directly after this session. When we get into workforce talent, this is the piece that has the section around adaptive staffing plans. For the Strong Start application, the only thing that we are asking school systems to do as part of this application is to indicate if they would like to request competitive funding to work with vendors for supports around adaptive staffing, and then the projected amount of funds they'll need for that. You are not expected to actually have an adaptive staffing plan by this afternoon. We just need to know if you would like to work with somebody, and if so, the funds that are needed. And then this last section, which is the LEA systems domain, of course, includes aspects around what's the plan to reopen facilities, what's your communications plan, how are you going to ensure that students have this one-to-one ratio for devices and also internet connectivity. What I would like to do now, and what I will say is, after we released the Strong Start Planning Guide, along with that release, we did include initial guidance around all of the key priorities. We're going to take a few minutes right now just to provide a high-level overview of the initial guidance for the adaptive staffing plan. Before we get into that, I'm going to pause for just one moment to see if we have pressing questions around the Strong Start application.
We have a question. What is competitive funding?
That's a very good question. So through the Federal CARES Act, this is a stimulus package that Congress passed, I think it was in March. Through the Federal CARES Act, each state received funds to support school systems. In Louisiana, we allocated 90% of the funds for school systems as flow-through funds. These are funds that you all have already received. We also set aside some funds that school systems can request on a competitive basis. And so through the Strong Start application, you have the opportunity to request competitive funds for the priorities that are aligned within this Strong Start application. All right, Sharon, any other questions?
I had one question about the slides. They are posted in the Sketch app for this session.
Okay. All right. So the next piece that we want to talk about is just to go over at a high level this initial guidance around adaptive staffing. I do want to say, and actually I'm going to start with this before I get into the guidance, that adaptive staffing plans, as we of course know, are contingent upon where are we in terms of the reopening of our state. And so in Louisiana, we do have this phased reopening plan. The phased reopening plan, which is called the Roadmap to Restarting Louisiana, is organized in 3 phases that roughly follow federal guidelines. So in our state, we moved to phase 1 on May 15th. And depending upon which phase we are in at the start of the school year will highly influence the staffing plans that you all are creating. Through the Resilient Louisiana Commission, we are working with the Department of Public Health to develop operating guidance for school systems. So I'm sure that many of you are aware that we have already worked with the Department of Health to issue guidance around transportation, around the opening of early learning centers, as well as around summer camp. We are now working with them to develop operating guidance for school systems, and we expect that that guidance will be available during the second half of June. And so one of the things that I do think is important to keep in mind is that within these 3 phases, there are, no matter which phase we're in, there are specific things that we believe are important for school systems to plan for. And so what I have on this slide is an excerpt from this initial staffing plan guidance. And the way that we're thinking about this is, given the uncertainty, we believe that what is most important for school system leaders to focus on are the 3 things that we have outlined here. And so we do believe that no matter in which phase we're in, that there could be some vulnerable teachers and students who will need to be able to teach and learn from home. It's definitely possible that school operations will need to be modified to facilitate small, static groups of students learning in school facilities while maintaining physical distancing. It's also possible that school facilities may need to close. And so in order to ensure a strong start, the request is that school leaders really think about how to develop contingency plans for these possibilities. What we have outlined here are different ways that school system leaders could think about maximizing learning time, especially for students who have unfinished learning, given that there may need to be modifications to operations for the upcoming year. And so the first thing is that no matter what environment we're in, it's important that plans are in place to ensure daily interaction with students and weekly interaction with peers. We do have separate guidance around staff and student monitoring. We are also working with vendors across the state to think through how their systems could be updated to support all of you in monitoring those interactions. The second thing in terms of thinking about maximizing learning time is thinking about how might learning time be extended. So when we get to a phase where we can really think through school calendars, would there be a possibility to add additional learning time? Would there be a possibility to add tutoring? Would there be a possibility to utilize traditional breaks to provide in-person or distance learning? These, of course, are at a very high level. And I think what we would like to dive into now is a conversation around, given the level of uncertainty, how can we even start to think about developing these adaptive staffing plans? And so we are now going to move into our panel discussion. Before we start that, I am again going to pause briefly to see if we have any questions about the initial guidance. And then, let's see, Sharon, do we have any questions?
We have, can you please define a student with unfinished learning?
Yeah, so actually, I would really recommend that you go to the session at 3 o'clock that is going to be around unfinished learning. They are going to talk about that in depth. And so those will be my colleagues from our academic content team, and I think they're best positioned to answer those questions. Sharon, any other questions?
No, ma'am, not right now.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, so we have a number of panelists who are with us today, and these are all folks who over the last several months have spent a lot of time working with school systems across the nation as they've made this unprecedented transition. And they're here with us today to share their best thinking around how to tackle this question of developing adaptive staffing plans. So I would like to ask each of you to say a quick hello before we get into the panel questions. David, it looks like you're first on my slide. So if you could just introduce yourself and just maybe say a little bit about ERS.
Sure. Sarah, can you still hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, thanks everyone for being part of this session and for including us. My name is David Rosenberg. I'm a partner at ERS, which is Education Resource Strategies. We are a nationally focused not-for-profit organization that works with school districts and district leaders all over the country. Our focus is on how district and school leaders organize resources to ensure that every child can succeed in every school. And so by resources, we mean people, time, and money. And so ultimately with that lens, it starts to get into questions about how do you organize a school, how do you organize a schedule and staffing, but also how do you organize district level resources to ensure that every dollar that is spent in the district is aligned to the strategy of what is going to be most likely to support student learning. And I'll just note we've had the privilege in the past several years to work in multiple parts of the state of Louisiana in different angles of the work. Some of them around the mentor-teacher support, and other questions around resource use. And think it's the state and the leaders who are here at the Teacher Leader Summit really are at the leading edge of so much of what we see around the country. So this is a super exciting, if a little nutty, time for us all to be having this conversation. I'm very grateful for your partnership.
Thanks, David. Okay, now we'll turn it over to the TNTP team. Victoria, can you say hello and introduce?
Yeah, hi, I'm Victoria Van Cleef. I work with TNTP and I live in Memphis, Tennessee. I've probably worked though in the Louisiana, primarily New Orleans, but in some of the other parishes probably since 2003. So I spend a lot of time there. And we've got a team of folks who are on to be able to chime in, but I will allow, they may be muted. So I'll go ahead and introduce Alex Podbelski, is one of our talent practice leads. Angela Maldonado is another deeply experienced partner in our talent practice, and especially with our focus on school leadership and leaders and leader preparation. And then Andrew Vaughn used to work for the L088 and has done a tremendous amount of both academic and talent work for TNTP and works across Louisiana. But as a national nonprofit, we work with schools and communities really focused on ending educational inequity by giving more students access to critical opportunities they need to reach their goals. And our work tends to fall into three broad buckets. So one is about expanding students' access to opportunity. Some of that is through both the quality of teachers they receive, making sure that schools are staffed, especially in historically hard to staff subject areas or hard to staff schools. Getting students access to really high quality instructional materials so that they're able to do the quality of work that prepares them for choices they want to make in college or career later in life, and making sure that those school environments are really engaging experiences for them. So we do a lot of consulting in that arena. We also do a lot of community and family engagement and making sure that we're authentically partnering with communities and listening to communities and working hand in hand so that parents and students' academic vision is incorporated into the key decisions that their school partners make. And finally, many of you have probably seen our reports. We do a lot of work to try and inspire a national agenda around these ideas. So our last report, The Opportunity Myth, raised a lot of both policy solutions for creating more equitable school experiences, but then the toolkits that accompanied that really hopefully supported school systems to go ahead and make some of those kinds of critical shifts as well. We've worked extensively across the state of Louisiana for years, both in more rural parishes, some of your larger cities, and doing a wide range, both teacher talent, consulting for teachers in classrooms, and I'll wait probably till the end when we dig in deeper and let Andrew speak more specifically to that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Okay, Henry, can you say a quick hello?
Yes, thanks, Sarah. My name is Henry Wellington. I'm the founder and CEO of Upbeat. I was a middle school special education teacher in New York City and worked at a couple of schools that had a lot of issues with teacher turnover. And I saw how it impacted students. So I ended up reaching out to two researchers who had looked at this issue of teacher retention for over a decade. And we built a survey that's research-based so that districts and schools can get good information about what influences retention and engagement for teachers specifically. And then we partner with districts on developing a plan of action based on that data. We're here because we saw this issue around distance learning, and we developed a teaching from home survey so that districts can get a strong assessment into how teachers are doing working from home. And we're really excited about the results we've gotten. We've already gotten over 10,000 survey results. So we'll look forward to talking to you about that soon. And then my colleague Brenda is here as well.
All right.
Is that, I'll just say hello, and I'll introduce myself as a former educator, former superintendent, a former lots of other things, and I've been working with Upbeat primarily in the support that's provided following the survey in terms of working with district leadership and administrators throughout the system and making strategic plans.
All right, thank you so much, Brenda, and thank you all for being here today. So what we're going to do now is We are going to have a panel discussion with ERS, TNTP, and Upbeat where they can share their best thinking around developing adaptive staffing plans. We think that the panel discussion will be about 45 minutes to an hour. I have an initial set of questions that I'm going to pose to our panelists. They're also going to share some initial staffing models with you. And then after that, we are going to open it up for questions from all of you. Okay, so the first question that we have, and I think I'm going to turn this to start over to Victoria, is, so we know that this spring school systems had to pivot so quickly from in-person to distance learning. That happened so fast. Everybody was really in crisis mode for quite a while. And we are now in a place where there's at least a tiny bit of time to plan. However, there are so many things to plan for that I think it's very overwhelming for school systems to even think about where do we start? What are the most important aspects in thinking about adaptive staffing? And so we would love to hear a little bit from you about, as school systems are starting to create these plans, what are the most important steps that they should start with?
Yeah, so thank you again. Honored to be here with all of you, but also have to say, it feels hard to say you're an expert in the face of all of this. The change has been so fast and furious. But those of you in Louisiana probably come the closest to being experts, right? You've not only just worked through this incredibly hard challenge, and there's not going to be much of a breathing room to tackle the challenge of the year coming ahead, but you've been here before, right? When I think back to what happened in Louisiana post-Katrina, you've managed the disruptions of learning, you've managed supporting students, families, and staff who faced enormous trauma, and you learned tremendous lessons from that. And I really think that kind of puts you guys in the position of being national leaders on school reopening. David and I in particular are working with the Council of Chief State School Officers right now to produce some guidance around staffing, scheduling, and budgeting for the coming year. The council is going to be releasing that in June, focused on this restart and recovery. And that guidance is going to be covering some key aspects like family and community engagement, well-being and connectedness, and mental health supports for students and staff, instruction, and the operational aspects. And I think whether we're writing about the operational considerations or the academic ones, I think for all of us, the most important place to start is by asking your end users, both how did the spring go and what's your vision for the coming school year? And I know that y'all learned those lessons post-Katrina, right, from seeing actions being imposed on communities rather than partnering with communities. And so I think, again, that just puts you guys a leg ahead. But I'd say we've organized ourselves, I think, around 6 key questions, and I'd encourage you to consider the same and see if I can post these in the chat if I can multitask, which is not always my strength. But really to start by asking, all right, what are your community and family engagement considerations? Your curriculum considerations, technology considerations, scheduling, and then your staffing and budgeting considerations. And then at the end of all of that, how are you going to know your system and choices are working? How are you going to manage and adjust? And so that's how we've been organizing our thinking. And I'll just begin with, when it comes to the community and family engagement considerations, asking yourselves, how will the needs of students, families, and communities, especially those most impacted, and the voices of teachers and school leaders be incorporated into the structures and decisions that school systems are making for school year 21? I think really we've been on a lot of calls with CTOs and parent advocacy groups, and one disconnect I'm hearing is I think school systems are working so hard to think about what families need, but sometimes what I'm hearing plans being made for are a disconnect from what parents are saying their vision for this coming school year is. So that notion of ask, don't assume, I think is really important. You got to find out who's coming back, what options are they seeking, and that's really going to help narrow your focus and prioritize your work and your planning. So I think just critical starting place, because you don't want to have spent time planning for scenarios that your families tell you aren't going to work for their employment or logistical needs, or building out staffing structures that you find out your students are telling you they've got some very specific needs that they want met, and you haven't planned for that. So asking those key stakeholders help prioritize your work and give clearer shape to the target you're aiming for in the fall. I think the second big question is around what are your curriculum considerations? So how will staffing, scheduling, and technology support your academic goals? And on this, again, I think Louisiana is far ahead of most states from what we've seen. I think one thing that played out in the fall is, in the spring, is that systems that were already using high quality instructional materials in Louisiana, so many of you have already adopted tier 1 materials, you fared much better than those without. Those curriculum are often built to support you. The vendors move really quickly to provide additional supports, but really thinking about how are your materials going to need to be laid out, whatever scheduling choices, whether they're remote or in person, you have to make. Really thinking that through. And I think what's key to that is to make sure that your academic and operational staff are in the room together. That oftentimes when we've got a big project like this, we silo off, we get the huge task list and everybody goes off and does their part. This is probably one time where you can't. You really want those people in the room together so that the people who are making scheduling and staffing decisions to accommodate public health considerations, that they're in a room with the academic team to figure out, in addition, what the demands of the curriculum might make on schedules. You know, examples of that, you've got to accommodate everyone returning and social distancing. So a lot of systems are thinking about these AB days, but tier 1 materials might dictate that your AB days have to be 2 days in a row, because to introduce concepts and get kids to a place before they can go do independent work might take 2 days versus, a Monday, Tuesday switch off. So things like that, you're going to want people in the room together making those choices so that make sure that you can still meet your academic goals and reduce disruption to student learning. And I think that's really hard when capacity is tight. That push to divide and conquer is going to be there, but as much as possible, I think some joint operational and academic task forces are key. I think the next big bucket that is a key enabler are your technology systems. How is each student going to access learning every day, whether in person or remote? And you're going to have to ask, like, what technology enables teachers to deliver new instruction, to provide access to learning activities, to enable teachers to share feedback on student work, whether that's written or through phone calls or some virtual, construct. What allows students to engage with content and submit their work? How do you streamline 3-way communication between parents, students, and teachers? So it's not just like what technology system. You're likely going to need multiple systems. And what do you need technology to do for you is going to be a really key thing, right? A teacher ought to be able to deliver synchronous instruction, asynchronous instruction. Students should be able to complete their activities they've been assigned, share work with the teacher. Parents ought to be able to see it all. And much of that can be done with Google applications for education, but it might be that a learning management system, something like Schoology, gives you more functionality. So at the end of the day, you've just got to think through what are your needs and what do you need tech to do for you. Scheduling's a big one, and David's going to dig in deep. I'll just say at a high level, right? When will students attend school, whether that's in person or remote, in a manageable and safe way that supports learning coherence is key. And you've got so many things to factor in terms of, parents' employment and logistical needs, but small considerations like make sure secondary school starts after elementary school so that older siblings can walk younger siblings to school. There's so many things to layer in terms of, you layer on top of basic things like that, basic human needs to the range of academic achievement, population of students with learning differences, your multilingual populations, all of those are going to impact your staffing structure. And so figuring that out is going to be key. And David's got some great tools for you guys to take a look at in a minute. And staffing and budgeting is the next big bucket. How will students be supported by teachers so they experience great and integrated teaching, whether that's in person or remote? I think there's a big consideration of new roles, new responsibilities, tremendous flexibility in how you either create those roles or assign people to meet, the social, emotional connectedness, the technology, the operational and academic needs, both of students in your schools. I think you're going to need tremendous flexibility or negotiate waivers, right, to be able to seek as much flexibility as you can, to be able to match people's strengths to your needs. And at the end of the day, I think using time really differently. How are you going to create more collaborative planning time? Because the need for people to be working across grade level and across subject area and even some vertical alignment as well is really, really huge, especially as you begin to prioritize the work of each grade. You've got to be talking to each other, and teachers have to be able to, it's no longer that a sub's going to come in and cover 1 or 2 days. They might be covering 2 weeks if someone shows symptoms. So really having that kind of integration and joint planning time, all forms of teaming are going to be critical. And so the cost and the need for that is a big puzzle and a hard one to figure out, right? If your average class size is 750 square feet, that probably means you're going to be able to fit 15 students per room. So doing that calculus is going to be critical. And finally, just like knowing that your system's working. How are you going to manage and adjust along the way? So I think the same thing as having like your academic and operations people in the same room. Here, I think the ideal would be integrated professional learning. So don't have a separate PD on technology from how you're going to then use your curriculum. You want to embed all those things as much as possible when you're going through this. So the professional learning up front this summer on how things are going to work, whether it's staff roles, whether it's schedules, whether it's the use of technology or the use of curriculum, doing those as much as possible in an integrated both plan and professional learning plan, I think is really critical to prepare your people. And then knowing that you're building in constant feedback systems and that you're going to be prepared to adjust. Our friends at ERS have two beautiful design principles. David, I'm going to steal from you here, but this notion of, build for long-term sustainable change in how we do school, so that you're looking for transformative opportunities to better suit students that this new world enables. And that you're including those changes to, who plays what roles where and when learning happens and how we partner in family and communities. And ultimately, the second one they talk about is assume customization and evolution. Just know that things are going to have to change, and sometimes they're going to have to change at the drop of a hat. But those are the 6 big buckets that we've been using in our planning. And I think I'd stop here and turn it over to David to say, David, what would you add to that? And I think, certainly in deeper specificity around some of the staffing and scheduling pieces.
Yeah, thank you. And so I want to just first, I'll be brief, but first +1, Victoria's comments about the nature of the challenge right now. And we know a lot as a sector. You know a lot about what works in educating kids, the importance of high quality curriculum, the importance of high quality instruction, the importance of targeted time and attention, and so on. But what we've never done is try to apply that learning and that logic in this environment with what we know is an unprecedented health crisis and unprecedented economic crisis and the long effects of that. So there's a spirit in all of this of gratitude and learning together as we go, and that I feel is important. I think the things I would just add or supplement to Victoria's points. One is that I think we're finding it to be really important for district leadership teams to get organized around a shared set of guiding principles that shape the work. And if obviously based on the parameters and the needs of your community and the input that you get from educators and families along the way to ensure that they're shaping it. But having, in a moment like this where there's so much change, having a shared set of guiding principles that become a touchstone everyone can always fall back on, that guides decisions, can be really important. So we did the same in our work and said, what are the guiding principles we're going to start with? And I think we're seeing that to be important with our district partners. And then the other thing I would just add, and it dovetails off Victoria's last point, is as you have guiding principles based on all the input that you get, you're going to set up your priorities, which essentially are a set of aspirations for what you want to be true in the re-entry world as you plan for the summer and fall. But what we also know is that the only thing that has really been true every week of this sort of crisis has been that things change, whether that's on a micro level of what we think a schedule is going to look like, or on a macro level on what the rules are when we walk down the street. And so preparing for that level of change is a little bit disconcerting, but also it means that as you set your priorities and you set your aspirations, you recognize that, as you learn more and as you unpeel the onion, proverbially, you're going to find that some things you thought to be true, that you wanted to be true, maybe aren't or aren't as important as you thought they were. And so that adaptability is going to be important. I'll close by saying that as getting input from families and community leaders and educators is hugely important right now. And there's this interesting dynamic that I don't know if some of you are feeling or seeing. I was talking with a chief academic officer in a district just yesterday, and she was reflecting on the fact that she's got a group of principals who, are creative and strategic and strong-minded and independent. And for the first time in her career, she's got virtually every single one of those principals coming to her and saying, just tell me what you want me to do, because this is so crazy hard. And so it's just a really interesting time to say, how do we get organized around those principles, around our core needs and priorities, and say, what's the thing we think that works, and then be prepared to adjust? Because we're just the learning curve right now is incredibly steep for us, but it means that we need to be learning every day and making adjustments and adaptations as educators do in their jobs. And this is the time to practice that as much as possible.
Yeah. All right. Thank you both. Before I turn it over to Henry, because I think that Henry and Brenda will have some really interesting ideas around getting feedback from teachers. I have one follow-up question for you, Victoria, and then also just want to raise something around, we do have a work group of, school leaders across the state. We're meeting bi-weekly to talk about adaptive staffing plans. And we actually had our first meeting last week. And I know that during that meeting, many of you indicated that you've already started to survey parents, which I think is fantastic, and that you are really learning important things for the upcoming year. Victoria, you mentioned that there was one school system that was perhaps making plans that weren't as well aligned to some of the needs of the community. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about kind of what that mismatch was, just so that our school systems might get more of an understanding of that.
Well, I mean, it was circulating, there's a giant petition going in Ohio right now with over 50,000 signatures against the AB schedule. And that while I think I understand the employment concerns, there might be a public health concern where you might have to do that, whether, as hard as it may seem to do, but I think to impose that not having talked to parents first is going to really backfire on you, really, and not serve families well, right? So I think it's a matter of, you might still have to make hard choices, but you should be in dialogue with families as you make them.
Definitely. Yes. So I appreciate you. I was curious when you said that, so I appreciate you giving just a little bit more information.
Some other things, like David and I have been going back and forth, even little things that where you just start to think like, oh, we had been planning for a half day. And that's where the voices of, let's say if you did AB Monday and Tuesday and then Wednesday's a half day, but that's where talking to the voices of educators as well, listening to your teachers and leaders, because they might say that half day is too hard. It's going to be too hard to plan 2 days on, 3 days off, and a half day in between. So listening to the educators as well is going to be critical to say, like, actually, we might have to keep that Wednesday's a day of planning, right? Teachers need that time together. Everybody's got to be virtual. So either way, I'm not making, not for me to make that call, but I think the dialogue is what's really critical, the asking, the listening, and trying to adapt as best as possible.
Yep. Thank you so much for that. So this is actually a really nice segue into some of the work that the Upbeat team has done. And so as Henry mentioned, Upbeat has a survey for educators. They, this spring, actually created a new survey that really focuses on getting teachers' feedback about what the transition to distance learning was like for them. And so, Henry, I think first it would be really interesting for all of us to hear, because you actually already have educators across the nation who completed this survey. And it would be really helpful for us to hear what are some of the things that teachers who have already completed this survey are sharing with school system leaders.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's really varied a lot across our schools. So there's, we have results from New York City to Chicago and charter schools there, results in South Carolina, rural districts, urban districts. And I think the one key takeaway that we've seen is it varies a lot depending on the environment. So you might see certain schools where student engagement as reported by teachers is much higher than other schools. And I think one common thread with that has been whether or not the use of technology was common in that school before they went to distance learning in this new situation. I think professional development is another piece that is varied a lot, again, by district. So So we asked a couple questions about professional development. One is whether or not teachers feel that they've been trained and supported around supporting students with their socio-emotional situation, and then whether or not teachers have been trained in just supporting teaching around distance learning. And that, again, the results have been a bit higher than what I would have anticipated across the country in terms of those survey respondents, but it varies. So there are certainly a lot of districts where that hasn't been taken place to the level that you might think. So I think the other piece is just seeing that it's varied as well by subject area when we look at our reports. So we've seen on the whole that English and math teachers would be getting a bit more keen support, and science teachers have not necessarily gotten as direct support in what we've seen. So I think there's not one big trend we can point to, but just kind of reinforces what we know, which is that context plays such a role in this. I think what we'd like to do, is it okay, Sarah, if I share my screen for a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, let's talk a little bit. So I think, Henry, maybe let's take a few minutes to talk about the survey. You can show a bit of that. And then I want to transition, and David, I think, is actually going to get into a few of the models that they put together. Because I think that will be helpful to see as well.
Okay, great.
So hopefully by now everyone can see the screen. When you're looking at the work that you're doing, first of all, I'll just say to you as a former superintendent, kudos to all of you and in working through this, not only for the future, but for those last few months. As I've worked and talked with district leadership and principals across the country, that work is tough. You know, as leaders, we kind of think we can see the future. And I think for the first time in many of our careers, we're saying we're going to get there, but we're not sure where we're going to go yet. So when we're looking at this from a perspective of those flexible staffing plans, it's just reinforcing what has been said previously, is that this is a very complex situation in terms of the staffing plans, and all of you are well aware of that. The communication piece, that is something you may have been analyzing already in terms of district communication, but also on-site communication with teachers. And right now we're going to talk mainly about teachers and that communication link, and how will that continue, whether they're with you at home, with you part of the time, and how are they, as I think Victoria just said, how's their voice being heard, and how are they included in the conversations rather than just told at a future time about every situation. Also looking at resources. You may be a district that has the one-to-one devices and you think you have all these resources, but I know across the country, people are drilling down and saying, do you have the adaptive technologies that you may need for your special education students to work, not just one-to-one devices? The work-life balance is an issue. I know I've talked to several principals who were at home. One, his wife was a teacher. He was at home and he had 3 children. And he said, I can really understand some of the complexities of how do I do my work, and still, if I'm home part of the time, how do I balance this? So we know you're considering that, as well as who's comfortable in different learning environments, whether it be on-site or away. One of the big things is, how do we continue to measure student engagement? There's so many variables that impact that. And how do we know if they're truly engaged or logging in the time? And in our case, in some cases, at what levels and what support do they have? Self-efficacy is really important, because if I am supported, and not only by the district, but also by the leadership in the school, what kind of supports do I need to believe I can make a difference, even in this new environment? And that's something to consider. What are the needs of the teachers in order to do that? Appreciation. How many shout outs do we need to give for people, not only for their hard work, but their stick-to-itness, their creativity, and how do we keep that going so that they feel that if I'm working from home or I have a different type of schedule, I am appreciated. The professional development that's been talked about before, but not only in the needs of distance learning, but it's complex. As Henry mentioned, how do I deal with students and some of the issues they're facing in their own homes? We've talked about trauma-informed education for quite a while now, and we can't lose sight of that as we are working with students and knowing they're at home. So what levels of professional development are needed? And it's not just the technology is one big piece, but we don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's a lot more complex than that. And then the collaboration. I think Victoria spoke to the collaboration and the importance of that collaborative piece, whether you're in a building or you're working from home. And I will even say in some of the conversations, it's across district. If I'm a singleton in a school, I need to know how to collaborate with others in other schools when I'm feeling like I'm in a new space right now. So as you look at this, it's really not a cycle. These pieces tie together, and we'll share some information with you about that as you're working through this.
Thanks, Brenda. So some background on our survey. Obviously the situation came in and, everybody had to kind of reset and deal with it in their own way. The first thing that I did was talk to our clients and our partners. I spoke to leaders in Texas and South Carolina, Georgia, Chicago, New York, all over. And the first thing that they told us is that after they kind of got over the shock of the situation was they wanted to know how their teachers are doing with working from home. And they wanted to get an assessment of that. They also wanted to be able to have context. So they wanted to have comparisons within that. So we quickly realized that we couldn't develop different sets of questions for each district because we wanted people to have some context and common ground with which to compare their results. So we ended up bringing together superintendents, principals, HR directors, teachers, and they met with our director of research, and we went through a process together where we kind of uncovered what they wanted to know about how their teachers were doing working from home. This now, feeds into our normal dashboard, which allows for a district view, individual school reports, the ability to view the data by types of teachers, so new teachers, grade level, subject area, to compare schools as well. And then we always do a data review with our partners. Brenda is our head of leadership. She leads our team of leadership coaches to help develop a plan from that. And then the results are always anonymously shared with leadership. So they're kept confidential by us, but the data can never be reviewed and looked at in a group of less than 4 teachers, so that district leadership does have the ability to view the data by grade level and subject area and to see those pockets where certain groups of teachers perhaps aren't supported in these key areas. And I'll go into the platform here, one second. Okay. So when you look at these categories, there's student engagement, communication, collaboration, work-life balance, self-efficacy. That is one piece that I did leave out, which is that, as you can imagine, this is sample data, so this is not our national data set, but as you can imagine, self-efficacy has been reported being lower by teachers in this situation than what we normally see in a normal school situation. If you look at this data, you can click on a category to see the questions that make up that given category. So if you're looking at measuring communication, you can look at it from the district view and then from the school view. There's questions around collaboration, work-life balance is where we get into issues around caretaking responsibilities for children or dependent adults. I do want to add that we have the flexibility to add questions, and I want to echo what everyone has said today, which is that this is an ever-changing situation. so we, with the input of our partners, we can add individual questions. We also have short response questions as well, because we know that there's so much to consider in developing these plans, and so there is that functionality as well. So another way to view this data, if you're planning on this from a leadership perspective, is to look at it by the subject area as well. So as I mentioned, if you're looking at self-reporting around student engagement, and we've talked to hundreds of principals about this in the last couple of weeks, and they are, really echoing that they feel this is an accurate representation that their teachers are sharing around this piece. And I know that there's other key ways to measure this as well, but if you're looking at the self-reporting from teachers, you can see science teachers reporting much lower engagement from their students as opposed to English or math. So that's one way to view the data, recognizing how communication is being looked at by certain subject areas. I think you want to think about, how do we make sure all teachers are being supported right now? How do we make sure that they're receiving the correct information, the proper support from us? So there's a way to look at that by subject area, and then there's also a way to look at it by schools across your district. And I think that that's another key piece, is how do we make sure all schools are supported right now? So you can look at and see some of the issues with student engagement at certain schools, work-life balance being more of an issue at a certain school. You can see that communication may not be as strong at one school. So, having a clear understanding of where that principal is. So this is just another way to look at the data to get some more information.
So Henry, if I could point out, I know the question Sarah asked earlier, the trends, and you responded, as we know from the responses we received thus far, it depends. But I know in one district with whom I'm working, we drilled down and we found that sense of efficacy, and I believe I'm making a difference, happened to be the lowest with the math department. But then when we drilled inside of high school, we found inside the high school, you may have assumed this, but it's the lower with the first and second year teachers. We also looked at another place and said, what's the lowest, who feels that they haven't had the support that they needed to move forward in teaching and helping their kids learn at the level they expect. And in one place, it happened to be teachers that are the CTE teachers. So it really does depend upon the subject area. And I know that from my experience in working with schools, a lot of times we spend the overwhelming majority of our time and involvement with what we call the core areas. But we do have a lot of teachers who are working outside that core that might be singletons in a school, and looking at what they need if they're performing arts versus a math teacher or an English teacher. And also, again, going back, we found some differences in teachers that were the teaching gifted and talented in one area, that they felt that they didn't have the support that they needed. Again, so that really helps when people can drill down to the school level or the district level and not just look at teacher voice as a whole.
Yeah, I think one last piece here is just the comparison function. So there's a comparison to our global data set for each question to kind of help ground your data. And then there will be a comparison to the Louisiana schools that are participating in the districts. And then you can also just compare back to your own district and compare to a previous administration. And that appears on the right side. So as you administer the survey this spring to help get some data to ground your next steps, you'll have the ability to track progress in these key categories and questions for next year on a school level and district level.
All right. Thank you all for sharing that. So with this, I think that you can see, that this is a tool that might be helpful in terms of getting key feedback from teachers about, what was the transition like. So what I would like to do now is, I know that for many of you, you're really grappling with the schedule and really trying to think about what might some options be for getting together an adaptive plan. And so I am going to turn it over. So as Victoria mentioned, TNTP and ERS have been working nationally to do some thinking around a few initial models on this. And so I do want to turn it over to David just so they can share some of their initial thinking on this. And I think it'll be a helpful jumping off point for a discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to show my screen in just a moment. We are, as I said, we are deep into this right now, and Henry was alluding to this, and Dr. Tanner as well, into this moment, and things are changing fast. So what we're going to look at today are very much in process documents. And one of the things that is exciting, if you get excited by this kind of thing, is that the pace of change and the room for innovation and figuring things out is really huge, and things change week to week. So one of the models I am going to show is one of these is an AB day model, and we'll talk a little bit about all the ways in which it could actually be applicable, not as an every other day model, thinking about the needs of individual communities. But let me start briefly with this view, and let me go to a presentation mode here. Okay, so for those of you who are on video, just thumbs up. You can see, you should be able to see a presentation mode of a Google slide. You know, some of the things, there are so many questions embedded in these design decisions, and what we've been trying to do is actually elevate those that help you figure out what kinds of schedules and what kinds of staffing models are even relevant to you and what are not. Because ultimately, not every school can build for every single situation. And so this is just sort of a working set of considerations that are like the before you design, but after you have some guiding principles. How do you plan for learning? And what we're focusing here on is physical distancing, right? There's a world in which we go back to full-time in-person learning in the not too distant future or the distant future, and we have to design that for a very different environment now. But we also have more base cases to work from. But when we think about planning for learning with physical distancing, we have to think about some really basic stuff based on the feedback you get from teachers, your community, and others, and including the healthcare professionals. So when we think about, you know, it's easy to talk about a hybrid or a blended model, but what exactly are the exposure or distancing needs for adults and children? Right? How many adults do we want children to be exposed to in a day? How many kids do we want adults to be exposed to in a day? And all of that. We recognize that schools are also sources of adult care for children, and that's not the primary purpose of school, but it is a reality that has clearly hit home for everyone who's managing their families and managing their profession. Right now, you've got questions about who's ready for remote teaching and learning. I know we've been hearing from some district leaders that there's a subset of parents who say, there ain't no way I'm sending my kid to school till there's a vaccine. And you got a subset of educators saying, there's no way I want to be in school because I feel like my health could be compromised. And you've got a subset of people who are on the other side and who are saying, how fast can I get back in the building? Because that's right for me. So you've got a whole set of questions here, and it gets more specific. You start thinking about, well, how much learning time? What's appropriate for a third grader in a remote setting in a given day? What's our stake in the ground going to be? Group sizes. Do we like the idea of, wow, with the remote instruction, I could have an asynchronous learning environment where everybody's charged with watching Dr. Tanner's lesson on the Battle of Bunker Hill before we come to class, and even for that class to be with very large groups. We also come into questions about this idea of who's teaching where and when, and I think these are part of sort of the stakes in the ground that are relevant in figuring out what models make sense. So one of the interesting things that's come up is, am I as a teacher, am I looked to teach in-person students and remote students? And also, am I supposed to do that at the same time, if both, or at different times? Like, those are some fundamental design decisions that we've never had to make before. But there are trade-offs associated with them, right? For example, if I say, I want to keep it straightforward for my teachers, I don't want them to have to teach in two different modalities, then there's the question of, well, who's working with kids on remote days? right? And how do we maintain those adult connections? And you get into other issues around teaching roles. Who am I comfortable leading instruction? And we're going to look at some examples here that are different than what we usually do. And then, of course, you've got the question of, look, do we need, from an equity standpoint, to ensure that some kids get to school and have in-school time because they need the physical support, they need the intellectual or emotional support, they have more catching up or learning to do, they're younger kids, or we want to prioritize those kids being in school. So all of these factors, even before we get into what a model is and the nuance of an AB day or an every other week, these are some of the questions that we're starting to tee up with district leaders first, because that helps us figure out what's potentially in scope. So I want to take a few minutes, and I don't want to take too much time because I know we have questions, but I'm going to jump around two different documents very quickly just to give you a little flavor of how this work looks. And the first one is this idea of an AB day. And in the spirit of change, 3 weeks ago, every other email I got from anywhere in the world was about, oh my gosh, we're all going to have to do AB days. AB day is the solution. And as Victoria raised, like, the deeper you get into it, the more you realize, well, that might not be right for everybody all the time. And so, but there's still a lot of learning for us with this. And I think this model, in terms of a resourcing issue, can work if you do 2 days on, 2 days off, or 1 week on, 1 week off. The concepts are the same. And again, I'm going to skip through a few things here. In each case, what we're doing, though, is we're starting with a school and a stake in the ground on what's happening in that school. And in this particular school, we're saying every student attends school 2 days a week. In this case, it actually is Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday, and that allows us to have very small group sizes in school, and that kids are remote on the other days. But there's some kids who are always remote, or sorry, kids who are unable to stay home when they're remote, and so we have to provide care for them and support for them when they're in school. And then we also want to make sure that we create this extra enough planning time for teachers. I'm on that little screen. There we go. So in each case we start, and this is where I start to go through quickly, we start thinking about, well, who's the staff we have in the school and what are we willing to ask them to do differently? What are the strategies that we think are really important? In this case, we're prioritizing connection point for students with the same adults. So what you're going to see in a minute is a schedule where even on the day that I'm home, I participate in my daily community circle with my in-person homeroom teacher, even though I'm not with her the rest of my remote day. But I also am exposed to what's called here a care team, which is a set of educators and professionals in the school who spend significant time checking in with small groups of kids on their remote days, not grounded in instruction per se, but talking about what's going on with them. I mean, really amping that up in ways that we might not otherwise do it. And then, of course, those teams check in along the way to see how their kids are doing. And then, of course, we have academic strategies. We've built in some acceleration time. We've set up leadership roles for teachers. We want collaborative time around content. And this is the sort of one of the last points I want to make. I'll show a couple of them in this model. Is it we talked about sort of the philosophical decisions at the beginning, right? That tell you what kinds of models might work for you. But there's also a set of decision points that happen within models. And this helps us shape the design. So for example, in this case, is us saying, what do we want in-person time and remote time to include, and therefore which staff support it? So in this case, we've said, look, there's an option where we say core and homeroom teachers are doing in-person instruction while non-core and other staff are doing remote learning. Or I could have teachers working across those learning modalities. So we answered that question earlier, and the answer for this school or district earlier was, I don't want teachers working across modalities. It's hard enough. So I'm willing to make the trade-off that my non-core teachers are facilitating the remote day. There's trade-offs associated with that. But in this case, we're making those trade-offs. And so you can see how that starts to play out individually, right? In classroom day, I'm in school with a small group of kids. You know, presumably we've set this up where I have the space and the social distancing requirements allow this to work. But I've made a decision that on my remote day, I've got pairs of teachers working across grades, working with, it's not really group size, it's more like teacher load, because over the course of the day, sorry, bouncing around. Over the course of the day, each of those teachers are doing different things. And a single student would be interacting with all three of those professionals, none of whom is their homeroom or core teacher. Right? We've made that decision that we're going to have intervention and specialist teachers and librarian be the people providing remote work. Now, again, if from a philosophical point, we've started and said, I do not want my non-core teachers in charge of core instruction, even when kids are remote, we would say, this model probably ain't going to work for you. Let's think about a different one, right? And so there's all these sort of paths along the way. I'll talk about one other decision point here, and then pause and see if we want to look at another model or just go to questions. A second decision point that's embedded in this model is, what do I do with kids on their remote days? Do I just go with option C, everybody's home on their remote learning days? Well, what we know in our communities is that, especially for younger kids, being home is not always a way to get learning done, and certainly even to get basic care done. And so, let alone when you start dealing with any patterns around safe environments or unsafe environments, or kids exposed to traumatic events in any way. We know for some students, school is the safe space. And so in this particular case, we've said, no, if there are some kids who we really think, or they think they can't be home on their remote day, their parents are working, hopefully, in this world where unemployment is rising. Hopefully this is a function of people also being able to work. We've said we want to care for these kids. And so then the question becomes, do we do it in school or do we have partners? In this case, the team has said, no, we're going to do it in school, and we're going to use our aides to do this in large underutilized spaces. So there's a set of sort of decisions around that got us to this point, and awareness of our context that said, we are comfortable with aides managing groups of students. We are comfortable having remote students be remote at school, not in classrooms. We are comfortable that we have enough space to support a certain number of those kids. And so that then feeds into the scheduling and the staffing model here, where we've said, yep, there's about 50 kids in this school who are going to come in, even when it's their quote remote day, and they're going to be paired with an aide along the way, which means in this case, 20% of students at this school are in school every day, or every day that the school is open, those 4 days a week. And then this plays out in actual schedules. You start matching teachers and students. These are all things that you all as school leaders and district leaders know, and you get to further decision points along the way. The last piece here I want to acknowledge is no single model works for every school, even within the same system. And so we always are thinking about adaptations and using these as base cases from which we go further. And the last two here, particular to some of the conversations we were having earlier about how many days in a row you might have kids in school. So let me pause there, and Sarah, if you see if there are particular questions or areas that we want to take the conversation, I'm happy to open a second model, but I also know we are a little bit short on time.
Yeah, what I would actually like to do is I'm going to pose a question to our group. And so can you all just do a quick raise of hands if you would like to see another model? And then Sharon, can you let us know what we're seeing? So if you want to see another model, and you can click the little raise your hand button or put yourself on video. Awesome.
We have a lot of raised hands. And,
all right, David.
We have a lot of comments in the Facebook.
Perfect.
I'm sorry, in the chat box.
Great. All right, thank you all so much.
Can I also add, like these tools they're supposed to come out like June 22nd, but David, I don't think I'm going on a limb to say, like, I think we're comfortable releasing drafts earlier, even for people to test and play with. I'll go seek to get permission to do that, but if you, as you said, Sarah, you've got groups meeting weekly, and David, I would imagine you'd love, like, if we could get drafts in people's hands, I think we'd probably we'll talk about that. But the quickest we can get these to you, we would love to do that. And
yeah, we would. And this is the kind of, so we're churning out more of these, but this work is best when it's done in district designing for specific schools. And that, for those of you who may have submitted the CARES Act application that Sarah was describing earlier, the approach, at least we're taking at ERS, is very much going to be grounded in what are the decision points in the models that will work best for you. And where we have a base case, let's work from it. Where we don't, we're going to develop it together. We're constantly doing that work. So yes, there would be tremendous opportunity and incredible value to have practitioners engaging with this stuff as we go.
All right, great. So I think overwhelmingly we'd like to do another model. And so, David, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Before I do that, so we just so you all know, with the Strong Start application I mentioned before, it is due this afternoon. And so if any of you were sort of unsure about would I like to partner with somebody on the adaptive staffing plans, but now you might believe that perhaps I would, you can update that application. The only thing that we need to know at this point in time is how much you think you'll need in terms of competitive funds. So just a quick note on that. We can talk a little bit more about that as we close out. So David, if you can do a quick overview of this next model, and then we're going to dive into some questions before we close out.
Sounds great. And I'm going to do a quick hop, skip, and a jump through with apologies for that. So this is a version of a hybrid model where, rather than, as what we saw with the AB Day, every student is in school some of the time. In this case, we're making an assertion that it's going to vary by grade level, and that early elementary kids are in school all the time, and upper L kids are remote all the time. You can decide which grade levels this is relevant for. But the logic here is we still have a need for physical distancing, so we can't have full classes. But that once we get to 4th grade, we feel like kids are more able to engage in remote instruction, and also we can departmentalize instruction in ways that allow kids to be exposed to more teachers and teachers to focus their instruction in those upper elementary grades. It also creates consistency day to day, right? There's no variation of which day is it for me as I go. And as we'll see here, we've made a decision also to pair classes of those who are in school with a pair of teachers, a homeroom teacher plus one from other instructional staff. So they're so they're still exposed to 2 teachers in their classroom. And then of course we still have to think about entry and exit and duties and all of that in terms of what the health and staffing needs are within a community. So again, at this elementary school, again with Daily Circle and a care team and the shared student check-ins, also similar with acceleration time and common planning time, as well as teacher leadership come into play. The decision points vary a little bit in this model, right? So we have to decide how many kids can attend school in person. Do we want everybody? Do we want some all the time or some of the time? Or do we want some in person all the time and some remote all the time? And we went in this model with an assumption of C. And that again requires some trade-offs, but the idea is that we can provide a consistent model for each child on each day. And so why we show K3 in person, also moving my own little controls around here, is if we're focusing on the school level staff, then we have to think about how many grades can be in school depending on the capacity of the school and our willingness to have students with non-certified instructional staff over the course of the day. And there's just the math here of how do you actually do it with this particular staffing model. Now, I could imagine somebody in a district saying, oh, yes, based on our guiding principles and our context where we want physical distancing, the idea of an early L, in school, upper L, out of school learning model, at least for a semester, could be a really interesting one for us. But I don't have 600 kids, and I'm a K6 school, and this isn't exactly my staffing level. Well, you could imagine with the staffing and scheduling tools that you could say, we actually have 450 kids, we actually have a 6th grade also, and we have a different number of FTE. The math changes, but the concepts are the same. And this is sort of the way we think about school design in general. And through this, we're surfacing the trade-offs, right? And the trade-offs here are, if I'm going to maintain those small class sizes, I need a certain number of classrooms here. I only have so many teachers, and therefore I need to think about who else supports those classrooms along the way. And again, there's a decision point here, and this will be the last major one I'll raise, and then just do a quick skip through. Is what's the number of student teacher rotations that we want for in-person, which is as much about health risk as anything, right? And so this particular school and district said, you know, given who our teachers are, given the feedback we've gotten from our families, given what we're learning about the health situation for children, having students exposed to 2 adults in a day is a trade we're willing to make. It makes sense in our community, and we're going to go for that. And so, but we're going to limit it to that, right? Which means my students are not going to separate teachers for art, music, gym, lunch, right? Everything else. They're only with two adults over the course of the day in this small group model. And so you could just imagine the depictions of how that looks for K3, right? I have a different teacher for core and non-core instruction. In 4 and 5, I'm departmentalizing, and these students are remote. So where I used to have 2 classes in person, I might have 3 groups of kids working with 3 different instructors over the course of a day in their remote model. I have to think about students with special needs along the way. Similarly, you think about sort of staffing groups for non-core instruction. Again, this model might not be what you want in some schools, depending on the staffing level you have and how you feel about the capacity of your specials teachers and aides. And so you might rethink, well, who are the people leading core instruction and leading non-core instruction, as well as those who are leading in-person and remote instruction at different grade levels, right? That's going to be very dependent on the individual context. But you can see all of this now starts to play into a schedule where homeroom teachers are the core instruction, doing core instruction in the morning, and then you have someone else doing it in the afternoon with a flip to the other classroom. And then the details sort of continue, including what it looks like for 4th and 5th grade as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the high-level overview, David. I know that many of you on the line have asked if you could get David's slides. I mentioned to some of you that, you know, ERS and TNTP have been working in this national group, and that they wanted to be able to share the most recent and current thinking, which is why we unfortunately couldn't get the slides in Sketch. David, let's you and I connect offline. I have everybody who signed up. I have all of your email addresses, so we'll see if we can get the updated slides to you. I do want to pause. We have about 9 minutes left. I want us to take at least a few minutes for some Q&A. Sharon, can you let us know what questions are coming in?
Sure. If anybody has a question, please post it in the chat box.
I did just share a link to an item bank of surveys for various stakeholders that you can use for planning for the year ahead. Everything from direct to student, there's questions for students, central office staff. It's a series of engagement items that you can pull from.
We have a question from Jody. What would be the suggestion in middle/high school where all subjects are departmentalized?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I assume the question is embedded in a world where there's physical distancing required. If the parameters are going to be physical distancing and therefore limited exposure to the number of adults to kids, then I think we really have to start thinking about one, which work is going to happen remotely, as part of that, to what extent are you pooling teachers and students across schools, or keeping a school structure, right? So am I taking history again with Dr. Tanner? I don't even know what your teaching background is. I'm going to keep putting you in American history because I love it. Am I going to take Dr. Tanner's American history class because that's what everyone in the district at 10th grade is doing in our remote time? So I think there's questions around sort of appetite and tolerance for that. I also think there's a really interesting question that is coming up more and more about these blended or hybrid models, and saying, in what context and at what point does it make sense to bring kids to school only some of the time, right? Obviously there's value in that. And, you know, as you point out from a departmentalized standpoint, like, does that mean I'm offering English and math in school and other subjects out of school? Given the variation in student schedules, how can I make that work? Or do I say, you know what, this is a remote model for high school, except for potentially some social emotional connection points that you want to create to keep students sort of connected to the physical space. So I think it just raises a whole set of questions around sort of what you want to put in scope and how strongly you feel about certain aspects of the design.
Okay, we have more questions coming in. How important would you say that every school in a district have a plan that is tailor-made to their needs?
I'm going to answer quickly and then allow Victoria to jump in too. So ultimately, like, it depends on what you mean by the plan, right? So there are probably some things that are going to be consistent and need to be consistent district-wide. We do not need to be reinventing the wheel every place. If ever there was a time not to do that, this is it. So there should be some district level decisions that are consistent. And you're still building essentially a master schedule. And we know that schools' master schedules will vary based on unique situations. While I have, 5 or 10 more kids in self-contained settings, while I have a STEM program with a different set of teachers and needs for my kids. And so clearly that kind of variation is going to exist. But I think we're at a place right now where the extent to which there can be district-wide stakes in the ground and decision, that's probably a good thing. Victoria, anything you would share here?
I think that you guys are probably better positioned to partner than a lot of other places. Your materials adoptions have driven the idea that a lot of you are using the same curriculum. So finding a partner district who is similar size to you, similar demographics, could really make your life easier, right? To be able to tackle some of those issues in partnership, and don't think that you're in this in isolation. As David said, don't reinvent the wheel. I think there's just huge opportunity to try to pair up around particular challenges.
Yeah, and I know that there are at least a few school systems who are already starting to think about that, and think about, especially in some of our school systems that may have historically struggled to find teachers in high need areas like secondary biology. I think there's a real opportunity here to think about, if secondary biology is now going to be delivered online, is it possible for the teacher in one parish to deliver that to students across parish lines? And I know some of you are already thinking about that, which is amazing. So before we close out, we're going to take one last question, and then I have a survey slide that I need you all to please complete. We really need your feedback to think about how we can make these sessions as useful as possible. While I'm getting that slide up, Sharon, can you point us to the last question?
The only other question was the one about incentive money. You want me to read that one?
Oh, so I think I might. So somebody asked this question. I think I answered whoever asked it. So there was a question about, what if I already submitted my application and now I've decided that I would like to partner with somebody for adaptive staffing plans. If you did already submit your application, so the deadline is not quite there yet, so you're early. You can update it, and so it is due today. If you would like to update it, then I'm going to ask that you email the LDOE grant help desk and just say, I would like to make a quick update. So that's how you do that. Sorry, y'all, I'm skipping over your overview slides. I think that we kind of did that a little bit backwards. So I have my email address here. I think that Sharon shared it with many of you as well. If you have any follow-up questions whatsoever, please reach out to me directly. If I don't know the answer, I will find somebody who does. Then lastly, before we close out, if you all registered with the Sketch app, please submit information to us about the usefulness of this webinar. That's very helpful to us. Finally, I would like to thank our panelists for participating this afternoon, for sharing your thoughts, and we appreciate everyone's time today. Sharon, I don't know, any last bits of information before we close out?
No, I just want to thank you guys. I learned a lot by being the moderator for this session. So it's very useful information. Thank you guys very much. And everybody can give a virtual clap.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. And like I said, we'll work to get the updated deck to you as soon as we can. So thanks again.